Okay, well, welcome today. This is the beginning of a series called Tellico Village Grand Rounds, and we are going to offer a series every quarter on very important, pertinent questions for the retired community. The topic today, I think it's going to be very important for all of us. It's called anabolic resistance, which really means muscle loss with aging. And I'm going to discuss the science of it and how you can deal with the aging process and how you can optimize it. So I always start with this darn slide because I love it. It shows a triple-decker hamburger, and it shows an incredibly buff gentleman. And I say, well, you know, the body's job is really to break down what we eat and break it down into micromolecules, and then it's supposed to build us back up. So why, if we eat a triple-decker, don't we look like a buff guy? I mean, where's the disconnect there? I don't quite get it. So there's a problem for us with aging. We actually lose the ability to make muscle as we get older, but it starts at the age of 25. At 25, you start losing muscle 1% a year, and it's really not, you can't really detect it. But by the age of 40, doctors will start seeing all sorts of things like rotator cuff injuries, knee injuries, biceps rupture, tennis elbow. All these are reflections of muscle weakness and muscle loss. And this starts in our 40s. And it'll typically show up in your weight-bearing joints first, like your knees and your hips and your back. But by the time you're our age, 60s and older, we start to really notice that carrying 20 pounds for a woman is difficult. We have a cat, and cat litter, 40-pound cat litter is like extremely heavy for me. But for men, carrying 40 or 50 pounds is heavy as we get older. So the things that really show us that we are starting to lose our strength is the difficulty getting out of a lower chair. If your knees are up and you're trying to get up, it's like you have to rock yourself and get yourself up, or difficulty getting off of a floor, when you're kind of doing a tripod thing to get up off the floor. These are signs of muscle weakness and muscle loss and aging. So the definition of anabolic resistance is the body has lost its ability to make proteins in response to stimuli from exercise and extra protein intake. And I know when we were younger, in our 20s and 30s, we could go work out for 5 days and we could actually see a muscle pop up right away, but that doesn't happen anymore. So we're going to look at what are the causes of muscle loss and aging and what we can do to reverse it. So here are a list of causes, and the first 4 are pretty basic: aging, sedentary lifestyle, excess body fat, and hormonal changes. But then I'm going to introduce you to science. And these topics are all over social media, but I don't think any of you know what they mean, and I'm going to try my best to help you understand them so that those words come alive for you when you do read your social media, podcasts, whatever you're following. So those are mitochondrial dysfunction, senescent cells, and then nutrient sensing issues. So what do we do about aging? There's nothing we can do about that. So sedentary lifestyle. Well, okay, with a sedentary lifestyle comes reduced muscle activity and loss of some very important muscle fibers that are called high-intensity muscle fibers. Then we also develop metabolic dysfunction. And then with all of this, we develop a diminishment in our heart ability to contract. So with the reduced muscle activity, these high-intensity muscle fibers are really the fibers that will help you if you fall, If you fall, you are scrambling, right? And if you don't have these fast twitch fibers that can scramble in a second's notice, then you're just going to fall and you're going to land how you land, and, God have mercy on you. But losing those fibers means that you have lost the neuromuscular connection to them, and now the muscle, that type of fiber, will atrophy. And so I'm going to talk to you about why it's so important to keep pressing, to keep these type of muscle fibers alive. I'm going to talk to you a lot about metabolic dysfunction because I think we all have heard that word, metabolic syndrome, metabolic resistance, insulin resistance. They're kind of all the same word, but you don't really hear it until your doctor says, oh, you're pre-diabetic. And pre-diabetes, this metabolic dysfunction starts 10 years before you're pre-diabetic. And, gosh, why aren't we being told that then, when we can do something about it? But the way it starts, and it all comes from inactivity, and this can even happen in our 40s while we're working, right? So weight gain, increased in our blood pressure, rise in glucose, fasting glucose levels, and then elevated cholesterol levels. That's really the definition of metabolic dysfunction. So a decrease in your heart efficiency, the way it works is that your heart loses its contractile ability. So we call that cardiac output. And when the heart contracts, it pushes blood out into your system. And that, if you are losing that strength in your heart, then you are going to be developing shortness of breath, fatigue. You might notice, first and foremost, before you notice any of those, some mild feet swelling around the ankles. But when it's late in the game, you're developing arrhythmias. One very common one is called atrial fibrillation or atrial flutter, and the other one is sick sinus syndrome that will happen most often once we're in our 80s. So sedentary lifestyle, you have first obesity, which is central fat accumulation. You also develop fat striations in your muscle tissue. You develop insulin resistance, metabolic dysregulation, which causes poor absorption of micromolecules such as glucose. But our talk is going to be about poor absorption of proteins, and so we get reduced muscle growth. And this process is a chronic inflammatory process. And then what happens is it changes our vascular health, and we get the smooth muscles of our arteries are actually a muscle, and those smooth muscles become stiff because of plaque buildup in the smooth muscle, and so now the stiffness translates into increasing blood pressure. And then when we develop worsening muscle quality, we get changes in our fibers. We lose strength, we lose quick movements and function, and then because of all this, we have nerve remodeling, poor balance, lack of agility, and sometimes it goes on to neuropathy. So in that list of causes of muscle loss was obesity. So obesity and muscle loss, we're going to talk mostly about visceral fat, and I know my friends all chuckle when I talk about this. But visceral fat actually promotes muscle breakdown. It has been found now to be one of the leading causes of liver transplants in the United States. That it used to be hepatitis C was the cause of liver transplants, and now they're finding women in midlife with fatty liver disease, which we call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's often termed NAFLD. So you'll hear somebody say NAFLD. Well, it's non-alcoholic, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And you have to keep that in mind when you're reading and you're watching social media. But 30% of adults in America have this. And now they're saying 10% of our pediatric population have this, fatty liver. And this is the new #1 cause of liver transplants. So I brought this body roundness index up because you can find this on a website called mdcalc.com. And basically, this is the new way to measure your abdominal obesity, because they're saying now the BMI is not really giving you quite what you need in the way of knowledge. It's what you really need to know is how much abdominal obesity you have, because it relates now to your mortality. So if you take yourself to the mdcalc.com and you click and search, it'll open up and you just go, to subject, put in obesity, and then you'll find this round body index. And then you just get a little tape measure and you measure your waist and your height, and it will tell you where you fall in here, and also it will give you your mortality risks. So this is visceral fat. There's a tape measure. But this is how it looks when you have done a cross-sectional of the abdomen, and you see all that yellow stuff inside. That is the fat that is inside the abdominal cavity. It's lining all of the internal organs. It's different than subcutaneous fat. So the fat on our hips or on the back of our arms, this isn't the dangerous stuff. It's the stuff that's in our abdominal cavity that is actually dangerous. In 2010, the American Medical Association created a new diagnosis called sarcopenic obesity. And it's basically because Americans are overfed. Our standard American diet consumes about 350 carbs a day, 75 to 100 grams of fat, and very little protein. And a lot of it is ultra-processed foods, which leads to adipose stores, leads to metabolic resistance. And the metabolic resistance gives you an 8-fold increase in cardiovascular disease and outcomes. And in our population in Tellico Village, over 60, we're seeing that 40% of us are overweight, and that men, on average, are 30% obese when they should be aiming for 13 to 24%, and women are 43% fat, and they should be aiming for 24 to 27. So this is all in the over 60 group. So this is sarcopenic obesity. It's kind of a poor slide, but it shows obesity, metabolic syndrome, and aging. And then it gives you this kind of secular elevated lipids, elevated blood glucose, and then inflammation, oxidative stress, and then insulin resistance, muscle loss, and then thus you're overweight and yet you have very poor muscle. So the last thing I'm going to mention about visceral fat is that it's considered an endocrine organ. It actually releases cytokines as if a pancreas or a thyroid, but it releases 3 very bad cytokines, IL-1, IL-6, and tumor necrosis factor. And these cytokines are inflammatory, and they will cause elevated glucose, elevated insulin, increased fatty acids in your circulation, and then, of course, you'll develop dyslipidemia or high LDLs, high cholesterol, and then you'll be in that metabolic syndrome category. But the part you won't see is the vascular inflammation, which is we start to develop plaque. And there's 2 different kinds of plaque that develop in our arteries. So we get these cytokines, they're floating in our bloodstream, plus our LDLs, very high LDLs, floating in our bloodstream. And then the LDLs get oxidized because of inflammation, and they go inside of the arteries, and now our immune system goes after those LDLs, thinking this is not right, they're not supposed to be there, but that very act of our immune system trying to correct that problem is what creates plaque. And so now the immune system is in there trying to chew up the LDLs, but it's making soft plaque. And soft plaque is considered the most dangerous because it's friable, it's easy to rupture. And so if it ruptures, it can move off and then go downstream, and then that downstream is a heart attack. And that's a lot of times when you see young men, 45, 50, having heart attacks, it's oftentimes from this type of scenario. But hard plaque happens slowly over time, and it's basically your body, your immune system now is trying to deal with the soft plaque, and so it's calcifying over and scarring over the soft plaque, and it's making that soft plaque very hard and stiff, and so it will basically clog your arteries very slowly, and so eventually you may need a stent, but it's not going to be like a massive rupture and a heart attack scenario. It's going to be a clogged artery, you need a stent, and we'll have to take care of that. So hormones and muscle loss. So with aging, we lose melatonin, vitamin D, those are hormones, right? Sex hormones. Women abruptly in menopause lose their hormones, and men start gradually losing their hormones after the age of 25. But there's been a real controversial topic in medicine, mostly in the last 3 years, but whether or not to offer hormone replacement to women in menopause. Because what we saw in 2001 was the Women's Health Initiative said, ooh, too dangerous, may cause breast cancer, and they removed all options for women to have hormone replacement. But then what ended up happening, women started dying of cardiovascular disease and strokes and hip fractures from osteoporosis. And so now you can just look in the literature and see that the cardiovascular protection from estrogen and progesterone far outweighs the risk of breast cancer. Women in menopause don't typically die of breast cancer because, well, it's more aggressive if you get breast cancer before menopause. But so they're saying now, gosh, the risk is so low for breast cancer, maybe we should offer it. So we're still in this battle right now. But so anyway, men lose testosterone, but it's so gradual, and it shows up for them kind of in lack of sleep, maybe a little more irritable. They lose muscle mass as well. And then the anabolic hormones that we all lose are human growth factor and insulin-like growth factor. These are super important to build muscle, but we're losing them with age. There's ways to stimulate it, like sauna use, intermittent fasting, regular exercise, good sleep, lowering your visceral fat. The one hormone that does not decrease with aging is cortisol. It seems actually to increase with aging. And cortisol actually promotes muscle breakdown. But you don't want to encourage more cortisol, and excess caffeine, alcohol, tobacco, lack of exercise, high carb diet. They even say isolation, so kind of depression can stimulate cortisol. So these are other reasons that cause muscle loss. So now we're going to talk about the cellular maladaptations. And the first one might go a little bit fuzzy because I realize that there may be a commercial involved in this, but I'm going to talk to you about what a mitochondria is. And so first I have to show you what a generalized cell looks like. And every cell has what number 1 and 2 is, which is the nucleus, because that's where our DNA is. And then every cell has the number 9, which is our mitochondria. And then depending on what the cell's function is, it'll have those other 4 through 12 in there. But we're going to talk about the number 9. And this is what a mitochondria looks like if it was actually cut in half. So the interesting thing about a mitochondria is that mitochondria make the energy for every cell. So you aren't alive if you don't have mitochondria. In fact, that is the definition of death, is when your mitochondria stop making ATP. So we have 36 trillion cells, and every cell can make up to 10 billion molecules of what's called ATP a second, and that is the energy making molecule for every cell. So what the mitochondria does is it takes our oxygen from our blood and our nutrients that we have consumed, and it combines the two to make ATP. And that ATP is what gives our cells energy to do the work that it needs to do. And so getting back to our topic of muscular loss, as we lose mitochondrial function, we lose the ability to make proteins, to contract our muscles, to all the work that our muscles typically want to do are not functioning at the highest level anymore. So we say that mitochondria are found in every cell. That's just for the sake of argument. But mostly they are found in cells that do a heavy work, like muscle, brain, and immune cells. So muscles contract, brain, they translate neurotransmitters and electric current, which is information from the brain to the tip of my finger. And then immune cells are scavengers of our entire body through our blood supply, and they look for foreign bodies. And their whole job is to burst when they find something foreign. So they need all the mitochondria they can get for their reaction. So an aging mitochondria, because of the oxygen that it needs, it will start making reactive oxygen species, which is very damaging to DNA and other proteins. That will make less ATP, less protein synthesis, and increase inflammation. So now, the next topic, I called it senescence, but it's very easy to remember zombie cells. So basically the body's made of cells, and cells know that they have a certain amount of time to double and multiply and create, and then when they get too much DNA damage, typically they self-sacrifice, and they give up all of their nutrients to the greater good to other cells. But now what we're finding is there's this problem called senescence, or zombie cells. The really big ones, cancer and neurodegenerative disease. Those are the really big ones that zombie cells play a role in. So zombie cells. Cells mostly age because of mitochondrial dysfunction, because of the oxygen reactive species destroys the DNA, and the cells age and the DNA damage, and they lose their ability to repair. And so instead of sacrificing themselves, called autophagy, they permanently go into a state of zombie-like. And these cells use nutrients, but they don't grow. So if it's your muscle and you've got zombie cell muscles, you've got weak muscles, you don't have any muscle growth, you're getting inflammation emitted from these cells, which is creating more oxygen, reactive oxygen species, damaging more mitochondria, leading to more inflammation. And so this is one of the major reasons that we lose muscle, is senescence or zombie cells. So the final one, that I'm taking you deep into science, but I don't think this is too bad. But the final one is nutrient sensing. So our body just seems to stop sensing the correct nutrients. Like, why do we have osteoporosis when we get older? Like, all of a sudden we can't make bone right anymore, where we never had a problem before, but there's a dysregulation of nutrients. And the one that's the most common and is the most obvious, and the one that is easiest for me to show you, is the one that's called insulin resistance. So I thought I would show you this one. But So insulin resistance is part of the metabolic dysfunction. And the way it happens is your blood glucose gets higher and higher. It tells your pancreas that you need more insulin, but the insulin is not telling cells to let the glucose in. So your pancreas is releasing more and more and more insulin, which causes you to get fat, which is kind of inflammatory, and yet you're still have very high blood sugars. But as I said, this happens 10 years before that diabetes diagnosis is made. This is going on in your body 10 years prior. So what are the types of nutrient sensing problems that happen with aging? Well, we have insulin resistance, which I just showed you, vitamin D deficiency. We seem to have that. Osteoporosis. There's a stem cell dysfunction. The cells that divide and help us regenerate from injury, they have all of a sudden reached some level of fatigue, and they no longer will divide and help to make new cells. And then our muscle loss, the amino acid absorption, and our lack of ability to continue to build muscle. These are all age-related. So the theories are, well, is it the loss of the anabolic steroids like testosterone and human growth factor and estrogen? Is that it? Is it vascular inflammation that's leading to the hardening of the arteries and the nutrients aren't getting in? So some of it, all of it is true, including there's some genetic issues that can be optimized, but it's all seems to be age-related. So I want, more than anything today, I want you to understand just how metabolically active the muscle is, because you do want to invest in your muscle just the way you invest in your darn 401k, okay? Because your muscle is what gives you a metabolic rate. So when you aren't exercising, you have what's called a resting metabolic rate. You know what that depends on? How much muscle mass you have. So if you have very little muscle mass, then your resting metabolic rate is going to be very low. Your muscle uses glucose and lipids, so your muscle helps to keep you from developing diabetes and high cholesterol. Your muscle adapts to exercise and will improve your glucose and lipid profiles. So, and also muscle contraction will stimulate mitochondria division and biogenesis. Muscles secrete what are called myokines that communicate to our endocrine system and help regulate inflammation and metabolism. So, and last, exercise induces autophagy, which is the opposite of a zombie cell, right? So, how do we get our muscle cells to readapt? This is the easy part of you can all relax now. The science part is over and we can all relax now. We can enjoy this now. So we've learned that mitochondrial health is super important. So how do we get our mitochondria healthy? Well, it's always going to be around exercise and diet. I hate to tell you this, but prolonged endurance exercise, 45 minutes, 3 to 4 times a day is probably 3 or 4 times a week is probably the minimum that you can get away with. You can spin cycle, you can treadmill, you can elliptical, you can moderate jogging, you can moderate swimming, you can walk. There's so many ways you can do it depending on your disability. If you've got a bad knee, then swim. There's so many ways you can get your endurance in. There's high-intensity training, which will really stimulate and really help preserve your cognitive decline from declining. But high-intensity training is like 80% of your maximum heart rate, and you do this for 20 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week. I prefer, honestly, the Zone 2 training at 70% of your maximum heart rate. I do 45 minutes, 3 to 5 days a week, and it has shown to decrease my visceral fat by about 3 pounds in 1 year. So I'm very happy with Zone 2 training. But you also have to do resistance training, right? You've got to keep your strength up, even if it's just 5-pound weights, but you have to use some kind of resistance training to build muscle or prevent muscle loss. So the other thing you can do for improving mitochondrial health is low carbohydrate diet. Honestly, we all live in this high carbohydrate standard American diet, which is 300 grams of carbohydrates a day. You don't need anything more than 1 gram per kilogram of your weight. So for me, that's 60 grams of carbohydrates a day. And they do show that you probably do need at least that to burn enough fat, but a low carbohydrate diet is a very easy diet to try. Low saturated fats, and then we're going to talk about increasing proteins too. So how do you improve autophagy or decrease zombie cells? Intermittent fasting, exercise, like I just mentioned, sauna, and we have sauna at our wellness center, and good deep sleep. There is something called the fasting mimicking diet that's been shown to be helpful, and I'll go over that at probably the next slide. And then how do we improve nutrient sensing? Well, the ketogenic diet has really shown to benefit that. And then time-restricted eating, calorie restriction, and carb restriction. So improving muscle readaptation, we're going to now try to improve our metabolic health, and we're going to focus now on nutrient-rich foods. So foods that have color, raspberries, blueberries, rhubarb, spinach, kale, all the things that we typically don't like to eat. But healthy carbs, those are healthy carbohydrates. And we try to just focus on the minimal amount of carbohydrates. We eliminate processed foods the best we can. We do healthy fats, and I have a list of healthy fats back there for you all, and I have a list at the end of my slideshow. And then also the fasting mimicking diet is another way. And the fasting mimicking diet first started for people with cancer. And they showed that doing this 5 days before chemotherapy actually gave better results than just chemotherapy alone. But now they're showing that the fasting mimicking diet, 5 days for 1 month, for 3 months, and you do that 3 times in a month, once a year, will help reset your metabolism. And what it is, it starts out with day 1, because it's only 5 days. Day 1 is 1,100 calorie diet that's plant-based. Day 2 through 5, plant-based, but low sugar, low protein, high unsaturated fats. And they don't try to tell you any other things, they just tell you that. And it's not difficult. I've done it twice, and it's not a difficult, it's supposed to be almost like fasting, but it doesn't give you the muscle loss that fasting does. So what can improve muscle mass? Resistance training, zone 2 training. What improves muscle synthesis? Here we go. You have to do protein supplementation. Did you guys know that you can only absorb 25 grams of protein every 3 hours? So you can't eat a 65-gram protein dinner and say you got 65 grams of protein. You only are going to get 25 grams. So you have to think about it in terms of like 4 times a day. You're going to have to supplement three times a day, 2 times a day, depending on what you eat, what else you eat. But one of the best things you can do is you can add creatine monohydrate. And there's been some speculation that it causes kidney disease, but that is kind of been ruled out in the medical community. It does give a false reading of your creatinine. You have to just tell your doctor that you're taking creatine monohydrate, and then they'll order a different test, but it doesn't mess with your kidneys at all. And if anything, it just helps build muscle, and it also has been very protective for neurodegenerative disease as well. The third thing is omega fatty acids. They help build muscle. So, how many protein grams per day? Okay, what is it the standard American diet says, like, what does it say, 0.8? And almost anybody who works out or is in the health community makes fun of that number because It's not, it's adequate. It's an adequate number for the general population, but it's not adequate for building muscle. So if you are an active adult and you want to build muscle, you should be doing 1.6 grams of protein a day per kilogram. That's a lot of protein. For me, that'll be 100 grams of protein. That's a lot. So, and if you don't eat breakfast, then, you're doing protein supplementation and whatever you can do. So what kind of protein supplements? If you have lactose intolerance, we have to talk about that. But whey protein is probably one of the best proteins there are because it doesn't cause gout. It's actually very quickly absorbed, and it's high in what is called branched chain amino acids. And leucine is a branched chain amino acid, and leucine stimulates muscle synthesis. So you kind of want leucine, and you want branched chain amino acids, and if you can, you want whey protein. But if you are lactose intolerant, you can do pea protein, and pea protein is an option, but you can also do whey isolate. That is supposed to not have any lactose in it and not cause any trouble. So timing is everything. So you have to think timing. That's what I said. You can only absorb so much protein in one sitting. So you've got to think of it 4 times a day. You've got to think of how much you need. In fact, that's your first thing you need to think about is how much protein do I need a day? And then you think about carbs and fat. You don't think about carbs, fat, and then protein. It's protein first. And so, are you supplementing 2, 3 times a day? What are you supplementing? Depends on what you eat. If you eat a steak for breakfast, if you eat steak at night, I don't know. Chicken doesn't have as much protein as steak, but there's a lot of saturated fats in steak, so you have to weigh it all out. So I'm going to just say this about endurance training. I think it's a great idea. I think no matter where you are in your life, endurance training is great. Bicycle, a dance class, whatever you can do for 45 minutes to get yourself breathing heavy is incredible for you. It's going to increase your mitochondrial biogenesis. It's going to reduce your zombie cells. It's going to improve your insulin resistance and increase your glucose uptake into every cell. It's going to improve your fat metabolism. It's going to burn the intramuscular fatty acids. Now, there is one great way to do a treadmill I just read about. It's called the 12-3-30. Has anybody heard about this? I've tried it. It's kind of hard. In fact, today I actually reached the 12% incline, and my backside is kind of sore. So it's 12 stands for 12% incline. 3 stands for 3 miles an hour, and 30 is for 30 minutes, and it's on a treadmill. And they're saying that this burns more fat and improves your mitochondria. This is in the sports world, and there's a lot of sports research out there, so I follow them. So endurance training will also improve your protein synthesis and improve your autophagy. So, I love endurance. So resistance training, why do we got to do it? It'll increase your muscle mass. It'll increase your intracellular ATP. And now we know what ATP is, huh? How about that? It'll improve your connective tissue strength. It will also improve autophagy, which is decreasing your zombie cells. It'll improve your nutrient sensing because your glucose transporter cells are going to, the muscle cells are going to be bringing in much more glucose while you're resistance training. And it's the best recruitment for neuromuscular attachments, and it's the best investment for you for agility and balance and health for future falls, because we are all going to fall. So I personally believe in combo of endurance and resistance, and that's what I do 4 or 5 times a week. is I do endurance training for 45 minutes, and then I go out and I do 15 to 20 minutes of weight resistance training. And, protein supplementation is super important, and I'm, seeing those results in myself, and I know you will see them for yourself as well. So, these are healthy fats. Have a look. Avocado, almonds, Brazil nuts, fatty fish, flaxseed, nut butters, walnuts. Here's some unhealthy carbs and healthy carbs. I personally watch out for even complex carbs because I'm not real convinced that even, the keto diet and the low carb diet, you have to watch out with your lentils and beans. So I like quinoa and sweet potatoes, but, I watch out for whole wheat bread and brown rice, but everybody else can do as they need to. Now here's plant-based protein, and it will show you how much protein you get with each serving versus animal. But animal is going to come with saturated fat, and plant-based is not, so I have that handout out there for you too. So, in conclusion, we want to look like this guy, right? So eat well, sleep well, drink less alcohol, and exercise more. Whatever you do, make it a lifestyle change. That's it.